During the Industrial Revolution, the social class order changed drastically. Mass society is any society of the modern era that possesses a mass culture and large-scale, impersonal social institution. A mass society is a society in which prosperity and bureaucracy have weakened traditional social ties. The middle class is now split up into the lower and upper middle class. At the bottom of the middle class, there were people like shopkeepers and those who did not make much money. At the top of the middle class, there were people who owned companies and made money due to the industrial production increase. The upper class was composed of estate and factory owners and rich nobles. The upper class in the 19th century was essentially the aristocracy. The working class in the 19th century was filled with the laborers who worked in the factories and other businesses. The working class was the backbone of society in the 1800s. People in the 19th century mainly married for financial reasons. A man must prove that he can earn enough money to support a wife and any future children before he received the girl's father's permission to wed. Women were not supposed to speak to men unless a married woman was present as a chaperone. In the 19th century, the birth rate rose greatly. Decline in death rates on average happened due to advances in medicine and living conditions generally improving. There was a large amount of immigration into cities like Manchester from southern and eastern Europe. In the 19th century, women and men's roles were more sharply defined than ever. Women mainly stayed at home and tended to the duties a servant would normally have. In the working class, women worked with children and men in factories under terrible conditions.
During the Industrial Revolution in England, many people moved to the cities like Manchester and London to be closer to work. There, the factory life became their whole lives, and it revolved around the issues and controversies created by the conditions of the factories. Time inside the factories, however, were very hard. When working, it would be common for workers to be injured or even killed by the machines they ran. Also, not only were grown men working in the factories, but women and children as young as 7 years old too. During this time, the workers had no health insurance and little job security since cheap labor was so easy to replace. As time went on, new machines and inventions came to the factories. Soon, some Englishmen became so angry with the idea that the machines were replacing the labor they get paid for. So, some broke into the factories at night in an attempt to save their jobs by destroying the machinery. However, Parliament was quick to outlaw the act as a capital offense. Gradually, the workers began to realize that destroying the machinery was useless. They got together to form labor unions to fight for higher pay and better working conditions. Not only was work terrible, but home for many people was a dark single room of filth. Lots of factory workers lived in these houses called poorhouses. They were often filthy and lacked decent sanitation. At the time, Charles Dickens was an important and famous author in England. He wrote on his opposition to the Industrial Revolution. In Oliver Twist, he describes the grim and grotesque reality of child labor and overpopulation. In another attempt to gain more privilege, respect, and rights, protesters called the Chartists called for some major reforms to the industry. In their request, they included the following: universal male suffrage for every sane man 21 and up, a secret ballot to protect the elector, the right to hold office without having to own land, payment for people who serve in office, and yearly elections. However, despite their protest, the Chartists were not met with any reform until years after. During the Industrial Revolution, there was a major overhaul of economic policies to protect the new entrepreneurs, factories, and everything economics related that occurred during the Industrial Revolution. These economic policies revolve around the ideas of supply and demand, food production against population, and the supply and quantity of labor against the wage rate. During this time of the economic policy overhaul, Adam Smith's laissez-faire policies he describes in The Wealth of Nations became widely accepted. He believed that government regulation should only happen to enforce contracts, protect private property, and ensure national defense, not to interfere with the competition in the free market. On the other hand, Thomas Malthus observed the ever-growing population. He believed that human population grows geometrically, whereas food grows arithmetically. This means that population will grow faster than food can be produced, and he believes that famine is inevitable. David Ricardo wrote on the iron law of wages. In this law, it is described that labor is a commodity determined by the law of supply and demand. He believes that increasing wages would lead to people having more children and in turn increasing the supply of workers, which then would make wages fall. In the Iron Law of Wages provided strong support for opposing labor unions and refusing to raise wages.